My sister-in-law stepped up to the microphone at our architecture firm's grand opening and slammed a stack of bank slips onto the podium. "I'm the silent investor keeping this place afloat," Vanessa announced to 72 guests. "And tonight, Colin's business partner and I are leaving together." She meant my husband. The room went silent, and even the two contractors near the bar stopped talking. I didn't grab the mic. Instead, I walked up to the podium, picked up the top slip, and scanned the 9-digit routing number without raising my voice, because the numbers on that paper already told me everything. If you've ever had to protect your family from someone they couldn't see clearly, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. To understand how a forensic accountant ends up holding a handful of forged wire transfers while her disabled brother watches his world end, I have to take you back 4 months. It started on a Saturday night in June, when Colin brought her to my parents' house for dinner. I'm Sarah, and Colin is my younger brother, quiet, deeply kind, with a mild motor disability. And he hadn't brought a woman home in 6 years. When Vanessa walked in, we wanted to love her. But within 20 minutes, she'd moved her chair to sit directly across from my husband, ignoring me entirely, leaning over his plate and tracing the edge of his blueprint drafts with her manicured nail. "You balance his books," she told me, her voice dropping into a breathy whisper meant only for the adults at the table. "But I'm the one who inspires his actual vision." I looked at my mother, her coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth, and at my father, who just stared at the floorboards. Any other night, a comment like that would have ended the dinner immediately. You don't walk into someone's home and tell the wife you're the muse behind her husband's career. But then I looked at Colin, and my brother was watching Vanessa with a smile so bright and hopeful it physically hurt to look at. He had spent his entire life apologizing for taking up space, and now this beautiful, seemingly successful woman was holding his hand under the table. So we said nothing. We passed the potatoes, poured the wine, and let her spin grand stories about her supposed startup ventures in the city. We let the disrespect slide, telling ourselves her arrogance was just an awkward attempt to impress us. That was our first mistake. Polite silence is the absolute worst weapon you can hand to a manipulator. Over the next 3 weeks, that uncomfortable dinner mutated into a suffocating routine. Vanessa didn't just date my brother, she began haunting my marriage, memorizing my husband's schedule. If he had a morning site visit at a new commercial property, she'd magically appear at the coffee shop across the street holding 2 lattes, claiming she just happened to be in the neighborhood for a meeting. If he stayed late at the office, she'd drop by with takeout and brush past my desk without making eye contact. I'm 34 years old, and I track missing corporate funds for a living. My job is to spot anomalies. And Vanessa was a glaring red flag in the middle of a perfectly balanced ledger, but every time I tried to gently bring it up to Colin, his face fell. He was so terrified of losing her that he was blind to what she was actually doing. And what she was doing had nothing to do with falling in love with my brother. The coffee shop was just a test run. 2 weeks after that stifling dinner, Vanessa escalated her surveillance, stepping out of the edges of our lives and directly into the center of my husband's career. His architecture firm was pitching a major municipal library project, and the presentation took place in the glass atrium of the downtown Marriott. I arrived early to drop off the final cost projection binders, but I never made it to his table. I stopped near the lobby entrance, because Vanessa was already there. She wasn't hiding. She stood by the catering station in a tailored wool suit that easily cost $3,000, holding a designer leather briefcase, and for a woman whose supposed startup had no product, no website, and no office, she was bleeding cash at an alarming rate. Where was the money coming from to maintain this pristine, high-net-worth illusion? I watched her scan the room while my husband stood at the podium speaking with the municipal directors. He'd left his leather portfolio on a side table. It held the library bids, but tucked in the very back pocket were the private blueprints for our anniversary home, a cabin in the Berkshires we'd spent 2 years designing, debating every beam and window placement. It was the physical blueprint of our future. Vanessa walked over to the side table and unzipped the portfolio. She didn't even glance at the library documents. She reached straight into the back pocket and pulled out the cabin schematics. She laid them flat on the table, pulled out her phone, and held it parallel to the paper to take 7 high-resolution photographs. I didn't move. I just watched her open a messaging app and attach the images to a local custom builder we'd interviewed a month prior. That answered the question from the dinner table. She wasn't just obsessed with my husband, she was actively stealing the exact dimensions of our life to build a carbon copy for herself. "Put the phone away," I said. Vanessa looked up without flinching, sliding the phone into her blazer pocket with a perfectly practiced smile. "Sarah, I'm just getting some inspiration. Colin and I are looking at empty lots." "You are leaving," I told her. Now. Her jaw tightened. But she kept the smile. Glancing at the two municipal partners, she wanted a scene. Wanted me to raise my voice and cause a disruption so she could play the victim in front of my husband's clients. I didn't give her that, I just picked up the portfolio, zipped it shut, and pointed to the revolving glass doors. "Have a good afternoon, Vanessa." She read the room, realized the partners were listening to the silence, and turned around and walked out. It was a clean exit. It cost me my brother. 3 hours later, my phone rang. It was Colin. And he didn't ask for my side of the story or about the blueprints. He just told me I was cruel, jealous, and completely out of line. Vanessa had called him in tears, claiming I'd humiliated her in public because I felt threatened by her entrepreneurial success. "Don't call me," Colin said. His voice shook as the line went dead. And he ignored my texts for 3 straight days. That evening, I drove to my parents' house to check on him. He wasn't in the kitchen, but a piece of mail sat on the counter, a risk disclosure notice from a premium commercial bank, addressed to Colin. I didn't open it, but I'm an accountant. I know what the routing codes on the envelope window mean. My brother works in an electronics assembly plant, takes the bus to save gas, eats leftovers for lunch. And yet a month before he even brought Vanessa to dinner, he'd sat at a bank desk and co-signed a high-yield business credit line for her, tying his pristine 12-year credit history and his social security number to her fictional empire. That was his sacrifice. He thought he was finally building a life with someone, never knowing he was financing her attempt to steal mine. I couldn't call the police about the stolen photos, and I couldn't report her for corporate trespassing either if I triggered a fraud investigation into Vanessa. The bank would freeze the accounts, pull the guarantor records, and make Colin legally liable for every dollar she'd burned. The debt would crush him long before the truth ever saw a courtroom. She had him locked in. Vanessa didn't retreat. After I kicked her out of the Marriott atrium, she adapted. 2 days later, she walked into the lobby of our architecture firm carrying 3 brown paper bags from a premium Italian deli, set them on the reception desk, and told the front coordinator that Colin had sent her to deliver lunch as an apology for our recent family argument. Colin was 9 miles away, standing his shift on a factory assembly line, and he hadn't spoken to me in a week. She didn't just leave the food and walk out. She used the delivery as an excuse to wander, spending 45 minutes supposedly looking for my husband to say a quick hello. She bypassed the open drafting tables in the main studio and drifted toward the back hallway, the one that housed the physical records room and our high-capacity commercial printer. I watched her from my glass office. I didn't march out there or raise my voice or cause a scene in front of our junior draftsmen. I waited until the heavy glass front door clicked shut behind her. Then, I went to work. I am a forensic accountant. People lie to your face every day. Ledgers do not. I opened the administrative terminal and pulled the supply expense reports. I wasn't looking for dramatic hacking software or digital footprints. I looked at the toner replacement rate, because our commercial printer logs every single job by employee ID, page count, and exact timestamp. I pulled the visitor sign-in sheet for the entire month of July and laid it flat next to my monitor. I took a red pen and ran it down the columns. On July 8th, Vanessa had arrived at 1:15 in the afternoon, and 7 minutes later an anonymous guest code printed 40 pages. On July 14th, she'd brought coffee at 9 in the morning, and 12 minutes after that the same guest code printed 85 pages. By July 19th, it had printed 112. You do not print hundreds of pages of architectural blueprints on standard letter paper. I left my office and walked down the back hallway. The printer display screen was asleep, the bottom paper tray still full. I checked the industrial shredder bin next to the wall empty, then walked over to the main recycling bin near the employee break room and dug past 3 empty coffee cups, a pile of junk mail, and a broken stapler. Near the bottom, I found a crumpled stack of thick ivory cardstock. I pulled it out, brought it to the counter, and smoothed the top page flat. It wasn't a love letter to my husband, and it wasn't a sketch of our anniversary cabin. It was page 14 of our master client database, listing the names, direct cellular numbers, and private escrow routing codes of 12 commercial real estate developers. The air in the room felt very still. The romantic obsession was a smokescreen, the tailored suits, the fake startup claims, the constant hovering around my husband. None of it meant she was a desperate woman trying to steal a marriage. She was a corporate thief, systematically printing hard copies of our firm's most valuable asset and carrying them out the front door in her designer leather briefcase. I walked straight to the security panel on the wall and reset the physical passcode for the records room, then logged into the server and restricted all administrative access to my personal terminal before sending an office-wide email mandating keycard access for all physical files. 20 minutes later, my husband walked into my office and shut the door. He rubbed the back of his neck, not even glancing at the server logs on my screen, and looked at me instead with pure exhaustion. He told me I was creating a hostile environment, that Vanessa was just an overeager girlfriend trying to fit into the family, and that my jealousy was making everyone in the office uncomfortable. "You're being too sensitive," he said. "You're turning a family disagreement into a lockdown. It's too much." I sat at my desk and listened to him. This is the oldest trick in the room, where the person who spots the smoke is always blamed for ruining the dinner party. My ability to see the problem was being treated as the problem itself. He wanted peace, and he was willing to sacrifice our security to get it. I didn't argue, and I didn't show him the crumpled page if I did. He'd call the police immediately, and if the police opened a fraud investigation, the bank would freeze Vanessa's accounts and default the commercial credit line Colin had blindly co-signed directly onto his shoulders. My brother would be financially ruined before the week was over. "I'll unlock the supply closet," I told my husband. "Just leave the records room secured." He sighed, nodded, and went back to work. I opened my bottom desk drawer and locked the cardstock inside. Vanessa had the data, but data is useless unless you can monetize it, and she had no licensed firm, no architecture degree. She needed a broker. Who was she going to sell it to? I waited for the phone. I compiled the printer logs, the supply invoices, and the date-stamped access records into a single physical folder, locked it in the bottom drawer of my desk, and waited. The grand opening of the new firm headquarters was exactly 11 days away. We were hosting 72 municipal investors and private developers in our newly renovated downtown warehouse. And that was the stage Vanessa was aiming for. I didn't need to confront her in the hallway. I just needed to wait. Then the office line rang. It was Tuesday, 10:14 in the morning. "Sarah Mitchell, Finance." I answered. "This is Arthur Vance," a man said, his voice deep and smooth, coated in the specific kind of forced patience men use when they want to intimidate you. "I am the senior legal counsel representing Vanessa Vargas, and I'm calling regarding your recent and repeated harassment of my client." I stopped typing and picked up a pen. "Your interference in her personal and professional life has crossed the threshold into tortious interference and defamation," he continued, not waiting for me to respond. "She is a key financial stakeholder in your brother's future, and she's willing to offer your firm a gracious settlement before we file a public civil suit, a 10% equity transfer in the architecture firm, signed by Friday, and we forgo litigation." It wasn't a jealous obsession anymore. It was extortion. She'd partnered with a professional to shake down the entire company, using my brother as the Trojan horse. "What is your state bar number, Mr. Vance?" I asked. He sighed loudly into the receiver. "Write it down, sweetheart. It's 42981. You have until the end of the week to review the equity transfer. I will email the documents." "I'll look into it," I said, and hung up. I didn't call my husband, and I didn't panic. I just opened the public directory for the State Disciplinary Board of Professional Regulation, a free database anyone can search, and typed the 5 digits into the registry. The page loaded instantly. Arthur Vance was indeed a lawyer, admitted to the bar 22 years ago, but a bright red banner stretched across the top of his profile. He'd been permanently disbarred in October of 2021, the disciplinary summary listing his offenses: commingling client escrow funds, wire fraud, grand larceny. He had absolutely no legal authority to file a parking ticket, let alone a civil lawsuit for corporate equity. Vanessa hadn't hired a high-powered attorney. She had hired a disgraced thief. I printed the disciplinary page and slid it into my locked drawer. Arthur Vance couldn't legally sue us, but he wasn't finished lacking the authority to file a real lawsuit. He resorted to a smear campaign to force our hand instead. At 3 in the afternoon, my husband walked into my office, shut the glass door, and dropped 2 printed emails onto my keyboard. Looking furious. "We just lost our lighting contractor and the primary caterer for the grand opening," he said. I read the emails. Arthur Vance had bypassed me entirely and sent formal cease and desist letters directly to our primary vendors. Using a fake law firm letterhead to claim our architecture firm was under active federal litigation for corporate fraud and asset seizure. It was a complete fabrication. But independent contractors don't take risks with federal fraud claims, they panicked. And 2 of them pulled out of the event immediately. "They think we're going under," my husband said, his voice rising. "Vanessa's lawyer is threatening to email the municipal board next. I told you to leave her alone. Now we have no food, no lights, and the city council is coming in 9 days. We might have to cancel the entire opening." "We are not canceling," I said. I spent the next 4 hours on the phone, calling 3 different catering companies in the next county until one agreed to take the job at a 40% rush premium. Then I drove to a theatrical supply warehouse on the edge of town, rented 12 industrial lighting rigs, and put the entire cost $4,250 on my personal credit card to keep the firm's accounts clear of the mess. I loaded the heavy steel rigs into my trunk in the rain, and I fixed the problem without giving Vanessa a single inch of ground. The next evening, I stayed late at the office to test the rented lighting on the main floor when the front lobby door chimed. And I walked out of the shadows. Colin was standing by the reception desk, his posture rigid. He hadn't spoken to me in almost 3 weeks, and the dark circles under his eyes looked heavier than I'd ever seen them. "Colin," I said. He shifted his weight, and as he turned toward me, I saw him slide something quickly behind his back, a thick, brown manila envelope, the kind courts use for official mail. "I just came to get my spare apartment keys," he said, not looking at my face, his gaze fixed on the floorboards. "Vanessa said I left them in your husband's desk." "They're in the top right drawer," I said. He walked past me, keeping his right arm pinned stiffly against his side to hide the envelope. I didn't ask him what it was. You don't push a man who's already backing himself into a corner. He grabbed his keys from the desk, walked back to the glass doors, and stopped with his hand on the handle. "She's investing heavily in this firm," Colin said to the glass, his voice tight. "She's going to save this place. You should be thanking her, Sarah." He walked out into the parking lot, defending her even as his hands shook, carrying the weight of a lie he couldn't afford to drop. The grand opening was exactly 1 week away. I turned the lights off. 9 days later, the rented industrial lights hummed above the renovated warehouse floor. And 72 guests stood holding champagne glasses. That brings us back to the exact moment the grand opening stopped, the moment Vanessa slammed her forged bank slips onto the podium, declaring she was our silent investor. My husband took a breath to defend himself, but I put my hand on his wrist and shook my head. Then I walked up the 3 wooden steps to the stage. I picked up the top wire transfer slip, held it under the stage lights, and spoke directly into the microphone. "This is an impressive piece of paper," I said. My voice echoed across the quiet warehouse. The city council members in the front row set their drinks down. But the federal routing number at the bottom is only 8 digits long. Commercial banks require 9. I flipped to the second page. The processing timestamp is formatted in military time. This specific bank only issues 12-hour standard consumer receipts, and the branch code in the upper right corner, I tapped the ink, belongs to a credit union in Ohio that was liquidated 4 years ago. I placed the papers back on the podium. "This isn't an investment, it's a downloaded template." Vanessa's jaw tightened. She'd used these exact crude forgeries to terrify our small lighting contractors. Plumbers and caterers don't audit bank receipts. They just panic. And she thought she could perform the same trick in front of a room full of real estate developers. Hoping the shock value alone would make us fold, she'd brought fake ledgers to a forensic accountant. I looked directly at the municipal directors. "Yesterday, a man named Arthur Vance contacted our vendors, claiming to be Vanessa's legal counsel. He threatened them with fake federal litigation." I pulled the printed disciplinary record from my blazer pocket and laid it next to her fake slips. Arthur Vance was permanently disbarred 5 years ago for grand larceny. I sent his recorded extortion attempt and his disciplinary file to the State Business Association at 8 o'clock this morning. He is officially blacklisted from consulting in this state. A low murmur rippled through the crowd as 2 private developers pulled out their phones. The truth was out, and the accomplice was severed. I expected Vanessa to run, to shrink under the weight of 72 people staring at her. I was wrong. She didn't pale. She didn't apologize. Manipulators do not surrender when you catch them. They pivot. She reached across the podium and grabbed the microphone, her voice completely steady. "Fine," Vanessa said. She unlatched her leather briefcase, pulled out a thick, unmarked black binder, and held it high enough for the entire room to see. "You want to talk about fraud," she told the crowd. "These are the internal tax ledgers for this architecture firm. I pulled them from their secured records room." She pointed directly at my husband. "They are hiding offshore material costs. They are evading federal tax laws on every municipal contract they touch." The whispering stopped, and the silence turned heavy. "I have a whistleblower complaint fully drafted for the IRS," Vanessa said, turning her eyes back to me. "If I am not given my 10% equity right now, I press send. The federal auditors will shut this entire building down by tomorrow morning." She smiled a cold, calculated expression. In the world of municipal contracts, even the rumor of an IRS audit is enough to destroy a firm's reputation permanently. And though she was bluffing, it was a devastating bluff. She thought she'd found the perfect leverage. She thought nobody else in the room had the power to stop her. Then, a chair scraped against the floor near the back of the room. Vanessa stood at the podium, holding the black binder. She had just threatened to call the IRS and burn our firm to the ground. She waited for me to cave. I didn't say a word. That same scrape of a chair against the hardwood echoed again. And this time, everyone turned to look. Colin stood up. My brother has a mild motor disability and usually walks with a slight drag on his left side, keeping his head down to avoid attention, but he didn't look down now. His posture was rigid as he walked down the center aisle, and all 72 people watched him. He climbed the wooden steps without looking at me or my husband, and stopped 18 inches from the woman he loved, bringing his right arm forward with the brown manila envelope he'd been hiding since yesterday. He slammed it down on the podium, and the slap of heavy paper echoed through the sound system. Colin didn't yell, he just reached into the envelope and pulled out a stack of federal court documents. "I paid a private online background service $80 this morning to run your real name," Colin said, holding up a Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy filing from Nevada. "Filed 3 years ago, federal tax debt identification number 4972. You don't have a startup. You don't have an investment portfolio." He dropped the file on top of her forged slips. "You bought that suit with the commercial credit line I co-signed 26 days ago," Colin said. "You used my social security number to fund this performance. I went to the bank. I saw the withdrawal logs this morning." Vanessa's body went stiff, her calculated smile vanishing as the hand holding the microphone went slack. It slipped through her fingers, hitting the wood with a sharp pop of audio feedback. She didn't pivot, and she didn't apologize. She stumbled backward, her heel catching awkwardly on the stage carpet, turned, and walked fast down the stairs. Her designer purse slid off her shoulder and hit the concrete floor near the exit. But she didn't stop to pick it up. She just pushed through the heavy glass doors and disappeared. My parents stood near the front row, looking first at the bankruptcy file and then at my brother. They finally saw the truth. Vanessa walked out the heavy glass doors, and nobody followed her. The latch clicked shut, and the low hum of the rented industrial lights filled the room again. My father asked the catering staff to start passing the appetizers, and the grand opening continued as if a thick layer of dust had simply been wiped off the drafting tables. I drove to Colin's apartment late that Tuesday, and instead of knocking on his open door, I stopped in the hallway. He was sitting at his small kitchen table, the overhead fixture dark, a single desk lamp angled down at the wood. Spread out in front of him were 3 statements from the commercial bank. The balances printed in bold black ink, thousands of dollars for tailored wool suits, premium deli lunches, and a fake corporate illusion. He was legally bound to every single dollar, having signed the commercial guarantor paperwork because he wanted a life with someone. And now he traced the routing numbers with his pen, tallying up a massive debt for a future that never existed. I walked into the kitchen and set a paper cup of black coffee next to the statements. I didn't tell him it was going to be okay. Because it wasn't, he was going to spend years working extra factory shifts to pay off the cost of a lie. I pulled out a chair and sat down next to him in the quiet room. You can forge all the bank slips you want, but a fabricated ledger will never balance the debt of a bankrupt life. I know exactly what you're screaming at your screen right now. You're wondering why Sarah didn't just call the police the second she pulled that crumpled client list out of the recycling bin, or why she let Vanessa parade around the office threatening the firm's vendors. It is easy to judge from the outside, but when you are dealing with a manipulator who has their hooks in a vulnerable family member, the rules change. This is the slot machine effect in action. Colin had been starved for affection and validation for years. When someone finally gives a starving person a small crumb of attention, it feels like hitting the jackpot. They will empty their pockets, co-sign premium credit lines, and defend the liar against their own family just to keep the machine spinning. Sarah understood that. If she had rushed in and blown up Vanessa's scheme prematurely, Colin would have dug his heels in. The bank would have defaulted the massive debt directly onto his shoulders, and Vanessa would have walked away clean. Sarah didn't endure those weeks of surveillance because she was weak. She endured them to build a trap that Vanessa couldn't talk her way out of. Let's look at the masterclass in self-defense Sarah gave us in this story. First, she used the ink audit. When Sarah suspected corporate theft, she didn't try to install hidden cameras or hire a private investigator. She went to the most boring machine in the building, the commercial printer. Manipulators are incredibly careful about what they say, but they get sloppy with logistics. Checking the toner logs and the visitor sign-in sheet gave Sarah undeniable, time-stamped proof. She looked at the mundane details that liars always forget to cover up. Second, she executed the credential check. The moment Arthur Vance called to extort her for 10% equity, Sarah didn't argue with him. She didn't let his deep voice or his legal jargon panic her. She kept him talking while she typed his state bar number into a free, public disciplinary registry. Scammers rely on your assumption that they are telling the truth. The second you verify their authority independently, their entire foundation collapses. Sarah used patience and paperwork to protect her family's livelihood. Colin is paying a heavy price, but he is paying it with his real family sitting beside him. A stolen blueprint can never hold up the walls of a genuine life. If you have ever had to quietly gather the facts while a manipulator tried to ruin your reputation, I want to hear your story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.